Unit 8 Effects of Urban Life. 8.0 Introduction. People of a country are the fundamental asset who generate and utilize its resources. They are at the core of the heart of a country, without which it becomes a mere abundance of natural resources. Ultimately, a country is known by its people. It is important to know the major enterprise of a country, the distribution of women and men in a country, how many children are born each year, how many people die, and major causes of the same, whether they live in cities or villages, major professions, status of employment and literacy rate, overall status of education, etc. The scope of the present unit begins with a discussion on population density and the factors affecting population density. The unit engages with the effects of urban life on the city dwellers. The growth and development of slums is also highlighted. The unit also throws light on the environmental solutions for a sustainable city. 8.1 Population density. The world at the beginning of 21st century recorded the presence of over 6 billion population. The population of the world is unevenly distributed. George B. Cressy, an American geographer, commented that Asia has many places where people are few and few places where people are very many. This is true about the pattern of population distribution worldwide. Patterns of population distribution and density help us to understand the demographic characteristics of any area. The term population distribution refers to the way people are spaced over the Earth's surface. Broadly, 90% of the world population lives in about 10% of its land area. The 10 most populous countries of the world contribute about 60% of the world's population. Of these 10 countries, are located in Asia. The size of a population for any species is not a static parameter. It keeps changing with time, depending on various factors including food availability, predation pressure and adverse weather. In fact, these changes in population density give us some idea of what is happening to the population, whether it is flourishing or declining. However, irrespective of the ultimate reasons, the density of a population in a given habitat during a given period fluctuates due to changes in 4 basic processes, 2 of which, natality and immigration, contribute to an increase in population density, and rest 2, mortality and emigration, contribute to a decrease. Natality refers to the number of births during a given period in the population that are added to the initial density. 2. Immigration is the number of individuals of the same species that have come into the habitat from elsewhere during the time period under consideration. 3. Mortality is the number of deaths in the population during a given period. 4. Emigration is the number of individuals of the population who left the habitat and gone elsewhere during the time period under consideration. 8.1.1 Concept of population density. Each unit of land has limited capacity to support people living on it. Hence, it is necessary to understand the ratio between the numbers of people to the size of land. This ratio is the density of population. It is usually measured in persons per square kilometer. The formula for calculating population density is density of population equals population / area. There are different methods to measure population density based on the kind of information. 1. Arithmetic density, the overall number of inhabitants / land area calculated in square miles or kilometers. 2. Agricultural density, the overall agrarian population / area of productive farming land. 3. Physiological density, the overall population / area of productive farming land. 4. Urban density, population peopling a metropolitan region, overall area of metropolitan region. 5. Residential density, population inhabiting a metropolitan region / area of housing space. 6. Ecological optimum, population density which is backed by the natural reserves. 8.1.2 Factors affecting population density. Populations are unevenly distributed across the world and much dependent on variation in physical environment. Hence, it is necessary for demographers to understand how and where populations are distributed. Present spatial distribution as well as its projections for the future is integral to a demographer's work. Through understanding of certain patterns, and the factors affecting population density and population size significantly, it is possible to make projections of the growth or possible decline in the global population and its spatial distribution. It will then become possible for policymakers to frame appropriate policies and strategies to protect the environment, plan for sustainable development, and prepare for modifications that accompany changes in population characteristics. Adverse physical conditions and lack of sufficient livelihood opportunities are primarily responsible for discouraging inhabitation of certain areas. There are 4 broadly grouped factors affecting population density. 8.1.2.1 Physical factors. Humans makes the choice of molding space according to their cultural values. There are variations in habitations in response to environmental stimuli. They relate to the natural environment through settlements, which are physical embodiments of an ideal environment. Climate is one of the most important natural conditions. It determines the nature of the flora of the region and influences agriculture. Climate also determines the type of animals that are associated with the region. Humans seek favorable climatic conditions in the places they want to settle in. The climatic belts are the principal areas of most of the human activity. It is evident from the world's population distribution that the highly populated countries are mostly located in the tropical regions. A warm, soothing and comfortable climate attracts people. Regions with such climates provide favorable conditions for a wide range of fauna to thrive, supporting the life systems in the place. Agriculture and animal husbandry make it possible to provide food for large populations. On the other hand, places with extreme climatic conditions are usually scarcely populated because it is difficult to sustain human life in such places. Countries in the temperate regions are also well populated. The regions are colder than the tropical regions but are hotter than the polar zones. The polar zones of the Arctic and subarctic regions remain the least populated of all. The extremely low temperature is not favorable for habitation. Vegetation is scarce. Comparatively long cold winters and very short summers make living difficult. Terrain is another important physical factor that affects population density. Navigable areas are more populated than rough ones. Mountains are less preferred because of lack of arable land. In addition, the cost of transportation, construction and agriculture are considerably higher in such places. In general, high altitudes also impose a physiological load on humans' capacity to adapt. This is because of reduced atmospheric pressure and low oxygen content. Higher altitudes, therefore, do not favor population and growth. Low-lying plains and coastal areas are more favored areas for human settlement. The Himalayas are thinly populated. The Ganges Valley is one of the densely populated areas of the world. Coastal regions have the advantage of ocean-going trade and transportation and thus, the major cities of the world are mostly located in the coastal areas. Water is essential for human survival. The ancient civilizations of the world flourished near rivers and the coastal areas. The Nile, Amazon, and Ganges river systems supported rich civilizations on their banks. Adequate rainfall favors vegetation and agriculture, which in turn determine a place's suitability for habitation. Because of lack of water, vast expanses of deserts are uninhabited. For the same reason, there is less population on the rain-shadow side of a hill or mountain. However, the leeward side is often densely populated. Thus, population tends to be concentrated in the well-watered river valleys and coastal plains. Soil quality influences the density and distribution of the population. A substantial percentage of populations earn their livelihood from agriculture, which depends on the quality of the soil. Food crops are grown on the soil, thus, is one of the most important raw materials required by population. The alluvial regions, deltas and the coastal regions of India support high population densities. On the other hand, mountainous regions, where soil erosion is a problem, such as the Trai region of Uttarakhand, or the sandy soils of the desert of Rajasthan, cannot support dense populations. However, scientific agricultural practices, with the aid of technology, have succeeded in converting low-yield soils to better quality ones. In the past, degradation or overutilization of soil led to the disappearance of flourishing civilizations. Vast reserves of mineral resources encouraged the establishment of industries, which attracted settlements. In India, the Chota-Nagpur Plateau is an area rich in mineral resources. The higher population densities in the Chota-Nagpur Plateau of Jharkhand and in the adjoining areas of Orissa are largely due to the availability of minerals. Location of a place is another significant factor. Proximity to major towns and cities favors concentration of population. Generally, staying within the city limits increases living costs. The city's periphery or nearby towns provide affordable housing facilities. Cheap and reliable transportation provide convenient means of commuting. Natural disasters also affect population density. Frequent storms, earthquakes, floods, wildfires discourage formation of settlements as people migrate to safer places. There are many examples of destruction of settlements due to the natural disasters. Malpa, a village in Pithoragarh district of Uttarakhand, was wiped away on the 18th of August 2018 because of a catastrophic landslide. 8.1.2.2 Socio-economic factors. The choice of settlement is generally based on natural processes. However, with time, humans have been able to adjust and control the natural processes to some extent. Thus, the factors influencing the choice of a place for settling no longer depends entirely on natural conditions. As needs changed with the evolution of human society, social and economic perspectives gained primacy. Economic activity is an indicator of employment opportunities. People in the rural areas are largely dependent on agriculture for their livelihood. If the land fails to support the rural population economically, or urban areas come up with more lucrative opportunities, people may choose to migrate to cities. Concentration of population in urban areas is an outcome of diverse economic activities and livelihood options offered by the cities. Therefore, population density in the towns and cities tends to be higher than in rural areas, and will continue to rise day by day. Industries are a large job market, and have attracted cheap labor for several decades. Inevitably, cities provide diverse livelihood opportunities in both occupational and personal domains. Industries, for example, coal mining industries, hydroelectric power stations etc. in largely uninhabited areas attract migrants to these places, resulting in increase in population as well as population density. An example in this category is Dubai. Due to varied job opportunities and tourism industry, a large migrant population have settled in a city that was otherwise unpopulated, making the place one of the fastest growing cities in the world. Social organization of newly migrated people encourages community growth, participation and cultural expansion. People moving out of their native places tend to settle in such a community where the language, culture, food habits etc. are alike. 8.1.2.3 Demographic factors. The demographic factors are the characteristics of the population. These factors have considerable influence on population distribution and settlement patterns. These include fertility and mortality trends and migration. Fertility and mortality together influence the natural increase in a region. Variation in the differential growth rates lead to changes in population density and distribution. Migration has deep influence on population distribution. The push factors, or negative circumstances, at the place of origin tend to motivate people to leave their native places to newer areas. Better opportunities in distant lands also encourage migration. People may choose to move due to land scarcity, shortage of work in current place of residence, insufficient wages or salaries, inadequate medical facilities and education, etc. Expectations of a better standard of living are often the main factors that drive rural to urban migration. The migration process allows redistribution of population, increasing the population density. Natural increase is the net outcome of fertility and mortality in a region. If in a region, the fertility level is high, the population of that place tends to increase. In such situations, mortality brings stability because of deaths. Epidemics and disease have always significantly influenced mortality levels. In earlier times, high occurrence of disease resulted in more deaths. To offset the loss, a high level of fertility was maintained. With medical advances, many diseases could be cured and the death rate fell sharply. In effect, the population grew. However, this created the problems of high population density and pressure on limited resources. With the introduction of contraceptives and with several family planning options available, birth rate began to go down. 8.1.2.4 Political factors. War, political disturbance, conflict, and weak administration negatively affect population distribution. War and political conflicts take a great toll on human lives. Death rates are high, and people are forced to move out in search of safety. Mortality rates peak and the out-migration dominate. Safer locations experience a sizable population growth because of the inflow of migrants. This is also the situation in regions near the political boundaries of countries that do not have peaceful relations. Even if there is no conflict, the fear of one compels people to move, making these areas the least populated ones. Political unrest and discrimination are detrimental to population growth. Clashes between different political parties or people with different religious beliefs have often resulted in a reduction of population in the affected area. Before settling in a new place permanently, migrant population looks for a place that not only provides economic opportunities but also provides safe and healthy environment for wholesome living. A politically unstable region is unable to provide both these conditions and hence it discourages not only the inflow of migrant population but also the already residing population which might be forced to leave the region in search of peaceful locations for settlement. Discrimination faced by migrants because of race, language, food, culture etc., discourages in migration. This has reduced the population growth on one hand and newer settlements on the other. Policies encouraging migration have often led to population growth in the destination region. International labor movements take place where rules governing cross-border migration are lenient. Migration helps in the redistribution of population. Policies that promote reduction in fertility levels, banning of infanticide, etc. also influence the population growth in a place. For example, China's strict enforcement of one-child policy succeeded in curbing fertility levels and controlling population. 8.1.3 Effects of population density on animals. The growth rate of a population at time is defined as the change in numbers per unit population at that time period. The rate usually changes with time as the population increases or decreases. The growth rate of animal populations is a function of the population density. In most mathematical models of populations whose changes resemble those of actual populations, the growth rate is a decreasing function of density, meaning that as the population increases the growth rate decreases and vice versa. Records of actual populations can be used to test the relation between growth rate and density by calculating correlation coefficients for these two characteristics. The methods of doing this are described and the limitations on the data are explained. The records of 111 different populations representing 71 species were analyzed by these methods. Of the 71 species, 7 were eliminated from further analysis because their census records were not significantly different from a series of random numbers. 47 had correlation coefficients that were negative and significantly different from 0. 16 had coefficients not significantly different from 0. All but one of these estimated coefficients were negative, and 1, the world's human population, had a positive coefficient significantly different from 0. There were no differences between taxonomic groups insects, other invertebrates, fish, birds, mammals. The primary conclusion is that in most animal species a population's growth rate is a decreasing function of density. This explains the relative stability of animal populations, which never continue to increase at rates their fertility would allow, and rarely decrease to extinction. Tentative conclusions are presented regarding the processes regulating population numbers. Populations of herbivorous insects at low and moderate levels are regulated by disease, parasites, and predators causing mortality that is an increasing function of density. Favorable conditions may allow an increase in insect numbers so rapid that the population temporarily escapes regulation by its enemies. Non-territorial species of vertebrates are normally controlled by predation and when that fails by competition. In both cases juvenile individuals are most affected. In territorial vertebrates competition for suitable territories determines the size of the breeding population. Populations of vertebrate species expecting man, are in general regulated by the production of adult individuals being a decreasing function of population density. 8.2 Effects of urban life on city dwellers. The effect of urban life in India has been marked by regional and interstate diversities, large-scale rural to urban migration, insufficient infrastructural facilities, growth of slums and other allied problems. The environment, behavior interaction has been explained by various theories and the effects are well explained by the theories as follows. Adaptation level approaches hold that individual becomes familiarized to a positive equal of ecological stimulation. The shared incidence of too much or too slight inspiration is an prominence of stimulation, excess or underload and stress. Stimulation approaches the bodily setting as a basis of sensual material that is vital to our welfare, multifaceted sensual material that comes from structures, streets, other persons and so on. Behavior setting theory states that there are reliable agreed designs of conduct which is in dissimilar locations. In every similar state there are recurring designs of behavior which are predictable. Integral theories are efforts to look at the filled difficulty of ordinary person-environment effects. This has two sub-methods. Firstly, the interactionist method, which suggests that the person and the setting are divisible objects but one inspires the other, they are repeatedly engaged. Some of the important effects of intensive urban growth in the Indian context are as follows. 8.2.1 Housing and slums. There is acute shortage of housing in urban areas and much of the available accommodation is qualitatively substandard. This problem has tended to worsen over years owing to rapid increase in population, fast rate of urbanization and proportionately inadequate addition to the residential provisions. Rents are disproportionately high. Private developers and colonizers find little profit in building houses in cities for the poor and the lower middle class, and they concentrate in meeting the housing needs of the rich as it is gainful. With large-scale migration to urban areas, many find slums as the only option left, despite all its disadvantages. Slums are characterized by substandard housing, overcrowding, lack of proper ventilation, sanitation, electric, roads, cooking arrangements and drinking water facilities. Basic hygiene seems drastically poor, giving rise to diseases, environmental pollution, demoralization and many social tensions. The aim of the 11th Sustainable Development Goals is to make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. The first target of the goal aims at access for all to adequate, safe and affordable housing and basic facilities and upgrade slums by 2030. India's slum population standing at nearly 35%, as per census, 2011, percentage of slum dwellers to total population in the cities is highest in Jabalpur 44.71%, Greater Visakhapatnam 44.6%, Greater Mumbai 41.84%, Meerut 41.74%, and Raipur 39.58%. 8.2.2 Overcrowding. In major cities in India like Bombay, Kolkata, Pune and Kanpur, 85% to 90% of the households lives in one or two room setups. In some homes, 5 to 6 persons live in one room. Overcrowding encourages deviant behavior, spreads diseases and hinders mental well-being. One effect of dense urban living is people's apathy and indifference. Once people adapt to poverty, attitudes and behaviors that initially developed in response to economic deprivation are passed on to subsequent generations through socialization. Oscar Lewis' culture of poverty was an attempt to develop a model of the behavior of the poor in a variety of cultural settings. It is a distinct way of life that develops among the lowest stratum in capitalistic societies in response to economic deprivation and inequality. One of the crucial elements of the culture of poverty is that the slum dwellers are disengaged and not integrated to the major institutions of the society. 8.2.3 Water supply, drainage and sanitation. Uninterrupted 24/7 water supply is a scarce scenario in India. Intermittent supply results in a vacuum being created in empty water lines which often suck in pollutants through leaking joints. Many small towns have no main water supply at all and are dependent on the wells. Drainage situation is equally bad. Because of the non-existence of a drainage system, large pools of stagnant water can be seen in the cities even during summer. There is total lack of motivation to tackle the basic sanitation needs of the cities. The spread of slums in congested urban areas and lack of civic sense among the dwellers further adds to the growing mound of filth and diseases. Attitudes towards cleanliness and community awareness about basic hygiene are extremely poor in most of the areas. 8.2.4 Transportation and traffic. Absence of planned and adequate arrangements for traffic and transport is another problem in urban areas in India. Majority of people use buses and tempos in comparison to rail. The increasing number of two-wheelers and four-wheelers make the traffic problem worse. Moreover, the number of buses plying the metropolitan cities is not adequate and commuters have to spend long hours to travel. Such huge traffic and vehicles also aid to substantial rise in air pollution. 8.2.5 Power shortage. Insufficient power supply is another disadvantageous aspect of many urban areas in India. The use of electrical gadgets has increased in sites, and establishment of new industries and the expansion of the old ones has also increased dependence on electricity. Conflict over power supply between two states often creates severe power crisis for people in the city. 8.2.6 Pollution. Several cities discharge 40 to 60% of their entire sewage and untreated industrial waste into the nearby rivers. Urban industry pollutes the atmosphere with smoke and toxic gases from chimneys. All these increase chances of diseases among the people living in the urban centers. According to UNICEF, lakhs of urban children die or suffer from diarrhea, tetanus, measles etc. because of poor sanitary conditions and water contamination. Newer techniques for waste management, new technology for garbage disposal and fundamental change in the municipal infrastructure and land use planning are emergently needed. All the above-mentioned urban problems indicate issues with migration and over-urbanization, industrial growth and lack of management, administrative issues and lack of proper timely urban planning. Systematic development of urban centers and creating job opportunities, regional planning along with city planning, encouraging industries to move to backward, less populated areas and adopting a pragmatic housing policy etc. are the need of the hour. 8.3 Growth of slums and rural to urban migration. Slums are dilapidated and thickly populated or overcrowded areas with lack of adequate public utilities, yet their existence in the city does serve a purpose, especially for the urban poor and migrants coming for some job opportunities in the city. It is in slums where economically backward people like industrial workers, casual laborers, hawkers, vegetable sellers and several other unorganized sectors live over years and generations. These slums play a very vital role in orienting new migrants to the urban environment by providing social comfort and support and also integrate themselves with the mainstream of city life. The figures relating to urban population living in slums are not accurately available, however, it is commonly accepted that nearly 1/5 of the total urban population in India lies in slums. The Task Force on Housing and Urban Development, appointed by the Planning Commission of India, estimated nearly 23% or over 3,60 lakh people are the urban slum dwellers in India. The proportion of the slum dwellers increase with the size of the urban population. Cities with less than 1 lakh population have 17.5%, cities with the population between 1 lakh and 10 lakhs have 21.5%, and cities having more than 10 lakhs of population have 35.5% slum dwellers in the total population. There are higher estimates in the metropolitan cities in India. In India, the slums are usually classified into 3 categories. The old building which have become decayed in course of time, the slums which are characterized by poor and inadequate housing conditions, constructed legally around mills and factories, the slums which are illegally come up in different parts of the city through unauthorized occupancy of open land. 8.3.1 Characteristics of slums. The major characteristics of slums, common across cities, are enumerated below. 1. Dilapidated and poor houses in slums are made of scrap materials. These are often raised on unauthorized land. 2. High population density and housing leads to overcrowding and congestion. 3. Lack of public facilities, such as drainage, sanitation, water taps, electricity, health services etc. 4. The slum dwellers are functionally integrated with the mainstream city life, but have high incidence of crime, juvenile delinquency, prostitution, drug use, beggary, illegitimacy, illicit etc. in most of the cases. 5. Slums have a culture of their own, as Lewis has referred to as the culture of poverty. 6. largely slums are subject to neglect and apathy of the larger community. These areas are markedly considered inferior, making slums subject of social isolation. This compels the slum dwellers to survive in such compromising conditions with almost no effort towards improvement. 8.3.2 Migration. Migration is a global phenomenon, with movements both within nations and internationally across borders. Migrants make up near about 1/7 of the world's population. Population diversity in most developed countries can be attributed to international migration, whereas in developing nations, it is mostly internal migration that contributes to this diversity. Migration to global cities, those that are advanced in terms of job opportunities, economic strength, political and cultural hubs of international significance, is increasing, with migrants. Migration can be classified in several ways, by political boundaries based on political limits and the boundaries crossed, such as districts, counties, state borders and international boundaries. Internal migration occurring within a country by crossing political boundaries, either within a state or between states. It may be urban to rural, urban to urban, rural to rural, or rural to urban. International migration occurring across country boundaries. Such migrants are known as immigrants coming into a foreign country, and emigrants leaving their own country. This also includes continent-to-continent migration. By movement patterns based on classifying people according to their social status, travel points and periodicity. Step migration initiating from a small settlement and moving to a larger one in the urban hierarchy over the years. 8.4 Environmental solutions to urban population and sustainability of cities. It is often said that the battle for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals will be won or lost in cities, which is why SDG 11 making cities inclusive, safe and sustainable is so important. By 2050, more than 2/3 of the world population are projected to live in urban areas, and most of this urban growth will take place in lower and lower middle-income countries. But densely built-up urban spaces tend to come with challenges of their own. Therefore, there is a need to start ensuring today that these urban areas will be inclusive, safe, sustainable and resilient. 8.4.1 Environmental solutions to urban problems. People modify environment as per own requirement. Population and pollution-related problems in cities toll a huge number of environmental resources destroyed brutally. As discussed, development of slums, overcrowding, scarcity of pure water, inadequate sanitation facilities, crisis of uninterrupted power supply are consequences of mismanaged and unplanned use of resources. Different measures at the administrative level have already prevailed and various awareness programs have also been organized over years. However, it is not only about the administrative policies and measures that can single-handedly solve the issues, but it is at the hand of citizens who can change their attitude towards utilization of resources in more and more judicious way. Optimal utilization of both environmental resources may not wash out all problems but can show a path towards betterment. Celebration of environmental days, weeks are of no use until the behavior changes. People need to be more cautious about waste management, rainwater harvesting, proper use of tap water, following traffic rules, regular pollution check etc. Various programs have been organized by educational institutions where students voluntarily participate to generate mass awareness. Creating a better future for them is also the responsibility of adults. Therefore, irrespective of age and gender, people need to be more aware and follow prevailing rules. Only then administrative efforts towards implementation of environmental laws and policies would succeed. 8.4.2 Sustainability of cities. This section concerns the social legislation relating to urban land and housing that are essential for sustainability of cities. Measures are needed to combat crises and for sustainability of cities and also for sustainable development of a nation in changing environmental and demographic characteristics. The Constitution gives the fundamental right of the freedom of movement to every citizen of India, but does not guarantee the right of housing to either the urban dwellers or the village people. The Constitution says that the responsibility of urban development and related welfare programs has been assigned to the state governments. The social legislation governing rent and sale of land and houses include the following two important acts, namely, Rent Control Act, 1948, and Urban Land Ceiling and Regulation Act, 1976 8.4.2.1. The Rent Control Act, 1948. The Rent Control Act was enacted with a view to control and regulate the rent of the houses. It was first enacted in the then Bombay state, in 1948, and later on in several other states. The Rent Control Act also protects the tenants from the atrocities of the house owner, especially in the sense that the owner of a house can neither force the tenant to vacate house, nor can he raise the rent of the house at his own will. Further, the Rent Control Act also imposes the responsibility of repairs of the house on the owner rather than on the tenant living in it. Systematic studies evaluating the impact of the Rent Control Act have revealed that the Act has not been able to bring about a solution to the problem of urban housing in the desired direction. Kiran Wadava's study reveals that the said Act has hardly been able to make any noticeable progress in solving the problem of urban housing. In fact, there have been some latent consequences of this Act. The owners are now not eager to rent out the house, as it will never come back in their possession due to the conditions of the Rent Control Act. Similarly, now people do not like to build houses with a view to earn rent. These issues ultimately add to the scarcity of houses. It is also observed that the owners hardly show any interest to repair houses which have already been rented out, simply because all such expenses are finally going to be a burden on them alone, with faint possibility of raising the rent. Owing to such apathetic attitude of the owners towards timely repairs and renovations, a large number of buildings in cities have deteriorated and become dangerous for living. The ill effects of the Rent Control Act are not systematically recognized, and in order to put a curb on such effects, the Ministry of Urban Development has taken some serious steps. In 1987, the National Commission on Urbanization was appointed under the Ministry of Urban Development, Government of India. In the interim report, the National Commission on Urbanization made several recommendations relating to the amendments in the terms and conditions of the existing Rent Control Act relating the continuation of the protection of the interests of the existing tenants, the inclusion of the possibility of raising rent, the separation of the rules, the regulations of renting houses for commercial purposes from houses to be rented for residential purposes, the provisions of providing incentives to build new houses, etc. It is believed that the inclusion of these amendments will certainly lessen the adverse effects of the existing Rent Control Act. 8.4.2.2 Urban Land Ceiling and Regulation Act, 1976. The second important step relating to the management of following three fundamental objectives: a. Redistribution of land, b. Prevention of speculation in land, c. Regulation of construction on vacant land. Under the provisions of this Act, the excess land, i.e., land excluding the prescribed size of the available plot, can be procured by the local authorities or the state government for wider public interests. Usually, the excess land under this Act is procured for the construction of houses for the urban poor and the low-income groups. Moreover, this Act imposes restrictions on the sale of excess land so as to curb speculation in urban land. Critics have pointed out that despite the existence of this act, the prices of land in every city have reached far beyond the capacity of common man. Moreover, the land procured for construction of houses for the urban poor and other public utilities is also negligible in size. In several cases, the owners of excess land have been successfully escaping the demands of the Land Ceiling Act through unjust practices. 8.4.3 Programs of slum clearance and construction of new houses. In the face of rapid urban growth, a large section of urban population is living in slums and suffering from acute shortage of houses, water supply, sanitation and other public facilities. These urban problems have assumed massive proportion, warranting social legislation and special attention in our national planning. Following from these efforts, one of the significant programs is the Slum Clearance Scheme and Program of Construction of New Houses for the Urban Poor and the Low-Income Groups. Under this scheme, low-cost houses, equipped with water closet, water tap, sanitation and drainage facilities are made available to the poor people, who can afford to pay a token amount as rent from their small earnings. Moreover, under the scheme of slum clearance, an entire area inhabited by economically and socially weaker sections, is provided with these common utilities to be shared by all. These programs under the Slum Clearance Scheme are subsidized to provide assistance to the state governments for construction of 1,40 lakh new houses at the rate of Rs.5,000 per house for the benefit of the urban poor and the low and middle income groups. In addition, the state governments and the local bodies of the cities also provide necessary funds for execution of such projects. It should, however, be noted that the voluntary agencies have still lagged behind in taking up the activities of slum clearance and construction of houses for the poor people. The following schemes have been executed in several cities with financial and other support from the state governments and local bodies for the construction of new houses. A. In 1952, a scheme for the construction of houses for the industrial workers came into existence. B. A scheme was introduced in 1954 for the construction of houses for the low-income groups. C. Since the implementation of the second five-year plan, the scheme of slum clearance and improvement came into existence on a regular basis. D. The Life Insurance Corporation of India started giving loans since the second five-year plan to the middle-income groups for the construction of houses. E. Since the fifth five-year plan, the program of building houses for the higher income groups were taken on hand with the objective that profit earned through such projects will be diverted for the construction of houses for the urban poor and the low-income groups. Special instructions were issued to the Housing Urban Development Corporation in this respect. 8.4.3.1 National Housing Bank. Systematic studies have revealed that most of the advantages of these schemes have been taken away by the middle and high-income groups. The plight of the urban poor has more or less remained the same. One of the greatest obstacles in effective implementation of the slum clearance program has been lack of adequate funds. The issue received significant attention in the seventh five-year plan. It led to the establishment of a national housing bank with an assistance of Rs.100 crores from the central government. It is proposed that the objectives of the National Housing Bank will be as follows: to provide a national body for financing the programs only for the construction of houses, to raise the sources for procuring finance for the construction of houses and make effective use of all such sources, to raise financial institutions at local and regional levels for advancing loans for construction of houses and institutions giving loans for other purposes, to establish meaningful links between financial institutions advancing loans for construction of houses and institutions giving loans for other purposes. 8.4.3.2 Rajivas Yojana / Slum Free India. Rajiva's Yojana is being implemented by the Ministry of Housing and Urban Poverty Alleviation in partnership with the communities, urban local bodies, state and central governments. It aims for a slum-free India where the slum dwellers will get the house ownership and have access basic amenities like water and electricity. 8.4.3.3 Sponge Cities Mission. With rapid urbanization, many cities in India witness floods and waterlogging during the monsoon months, for instance, Mumbai, Delhi, Gurgaon, Bangalore, to name a few. Thus, to manage urban flooding in metro cities, the cities will be designed a sponge city, in a way that will passively absorb and use the clean rainwater through ecologically friendly ways like rainwater harvesting, creating rooftop gardens, rain gardens, green space and blue spaces, ponds and lakes. All these efforts are made with the hope that conditions of the slum dwellers and the urban dwellers can be suitably improved so that they can also lead a fuller urban life and keeping in perspective the environmental, cultural, financial and administrative sustainability of the cities. 8.5 Summary. To sum up what we have learnt in this unit, here is a quick recap. Urbanization refers to a social process. In demographic sense, it exhibits the proportion of the urban population to the total population of a society. In this sense, it also refers to a way of life typically associated with the city. The haphazard and steep rise in the population of big cities has led to the notion of over-urbanization in India, which, in the societal context, may not be true. At present, less than 1/3 of the total population of India lives in towns and cities. The industrial urban India has given birth to several environmental and social problems, among which the problems of slums, crimes, housing, pollution and inadequate public utilities have become grave. In the absence of a national policy on urbanization, the matters of urban planning and development remain largely confined to the efforts of the state governments. The schemes of slum clearance and housing for the urban poor and the low-income groups are in a way addressed the solution of these problems. The 5-year plans have also made significant efforts through making provisions of financial support to several programs of urban renewal. Various government schemes like Rajiva's Yojana / Slum Free India, Sponge Cities Mission, etc. are aimed to ameliorate the quality of life of the city dwellers and to make the cities resilient and sustainable.